The first time you see the MiBot, it almost looks fake, barely 2.5 meters long, just one seat, a tiny electric motor, a battery designed for short daily trips, and it plugs into an ordinary household outlet. To many Americans, it looks more like a toy than a real automobile. But this isn't a concept car. It's being developed as a real vehicle for everyday transportation. Unlike most modern EVs, the MiBot isn't trying to win a horsepower race. It isn't trying to travel 500 miles on a single charge. It isn't competing with Tesla. Instead, every design decision follows one simple question: what does one person actually need for a normal day? That's why it stays small. That's why it stays light. And that's why it costs dramatically less than almost every new vehicle on the market. Here's what makes the MiBot so unusual. The real innovation isn't the size, it's the assumption behind it. For decades, automakers designed cars around maximum capability. The MiBot is designed around average reality. Most daily trips are short. Most commutes involve one person. Most cars spend far more time parked than driving. Once you see it that way, the MiBot suddenly starts making sense. For generations, we've been taught that every new car should be bigger, faster, and more capable than the one before it. The MiBot quietly challenges that entire belief. Maybe transportation doesn't always need more. Maybe sometimes less is exactly enough. But if the idea is really this simple, why didn't Toyota, Honda, Ford, or General Motors build it first? The philosophy behind MiBot. People often assume MiBot is a strange little invention, something completely new, something nobody had thought of before, but that's not what it is. MiBot didn't suddenly appear. It inherited an idea that Japan has been quietly refining for decades. To understand this tiny EV, you first have to stop looking at the car and start looking at the country that created it. Because MiBot isn't the beginning of the story, it's the latest chapter. Most car companies begin with the same question: how can we build a vehicle that does more? More horsepower, more range, more technology, more comfort, more screens, more luxury. Japan quietly asked a different question: how little does a car actually need before it stops being useful? That single question changed everything. Instead of adding features, Japanese engineers spent decades removing them. Not because they couldn't build bigger cars, because they didn't believe bigger automatically meant better. Walk through almost any Japanese city, and the answer becomes obvious. The streets are narrow, parking spaces are tiny. Many homes don't even have garages. Most people drive alone. Most daily trips are surprisingly short. In that environment, a giant SUV solves very few problems, but a small lightweight vehicle solves many. It parks almost anywhere, consumes less energy, costs less to buy, costs less to maintain, and takes up less space in cities where every square meter matters. Japan didn't design small cars because people loved small cars. Japan designed them because everyday life demanded them. That philosophy eventually became the K car. Tiny vehicles that many people outside Japan once laughed at. Too small, too slow, too simple. Yet millions of Japanese families kept buying them, not because they were exciting, but because they quietly made daily life easier. And that's exactly where MiBot comes from. It isn't trying to compete with a Tesla or replace a pickup truck. It's answering the same question Japan has been asking for decades. What is the smallest, simplest, most affordable vehicle that can still solve an ordinary person's daily journey? If that question sounds surprisingly reasonable, then another question immediately follows. If Japan discovered this decades ago, why didn't Detroit? Japan never built smaller cars. It built a different way of thinking. The MiBot may look revolutionary, but in Japan, it's actually part of a much bigger story. Long before electric vehicles became fashionable, Japan had already embraced an entirely different idea of what a car should be. Instead of asking how to build the biggest or most powerful vehicle, Japanese engineers spent decades asking a much simpler question: what is the smallest car that can still improve everyday life? That question gave birth to an entire category of vehicles most Americans have never experienced. They're called K cars. For millions of Japanese drivers, they aren't a compromise. They're the perfect answer. Japan's cities were never designed for massive pickup trucks. Roads are narrower, parking spaces are smaller, fuel has always been more expensive, and millions of people simply don't drive very far each day. Instead of fighting those realities, Japan designed around them. Cars like the Honda N-Box, Suzuki Alto, Daihatsu Tanto, and Nissan Sakura dominate the market because they solve everyday problems better than larger vehicles. They're easier to park, cheaper to own, more energy efficient, and surprisingly spacious for their size. To an American, they may look unusually small. To a Japanese commuter, they simply make sense. That's when something important becomes clear. Japan never fell in love with small cars. Japan fell in love with efficiency. The small size is simply the result. Every design choice removes something unnecessary. Less weight, less material, smaller batteries, lower running costs, less space wasted. The goal isn't to build less car. The goal is to build exactly the car people actually need. The MiBot simply pushes that philosophy one step further. For decades, much of the auto industry believed innovation meant adding more horsepower, more technology, more features, more size. Japan quietly followed the opposite path. Innovation sometimes means removing everything people don't truly need. Suddenly, the MiBot no longer looks strange. It looks like the logical next step. But if Japan has been thinking this way for decades, why did America choose such a completely different direction? Detroit didn't miss the trend. It chose a different business at first glance. It seems obvious. Detroit simply ignored small cars. But that's not what actually happened. Ford knows how to build compact cars. General Motors knows how. Even Chrysler has done it before. The problem was never engineering, the problem was economics. Over the past 20 years, American automakers discovered something incredibly profitable. Customers were willing to spend more for SUVs. They paid even more for pickup trucks. Luxury features increased profit margins. Larger vehicles generated far more revenue than compact cars. At the same time, cheap fuel, suburban lifestyles, and long-distance driving encouraged Americans to buy bigger vehicles. Everything pointed in the same direction: build larger cars, sell fewer units, earn higher profits. From a business perspective, it was an incredibly successful strategy. That's why comparing the MiBot to an F-150 completely misses the point. They're solving different problems. A full-size pickup is designed to tow heavy trailers, carry large families, and travel long distances. The MiBot is designed for one commuter traveling a few miles through the city. Neither vehicle is wrong. They're simply built for different realities. And that's exactly where the story becomes interesting, because reality itself is beginning to change. Young buyers are delaying car ownership. Cities are becoming denser. Parking is becoming more expensive. More people work closer to home or from home altogether. The question isn't whether America needs fewer pickup trucks. The question is whether it also needs a completely new category of vehicle. Detroit didn't fail because it built large vehicles. Detroit succeeded because that's exactly what the market wanted. But history shows something important. Markets don't stay the same forever. Consumer behavior changes, technology changes, cities change. And when those things change together, entire industries change with them. The last time America underestimated a small Japanese car, it reshaped the global auto industry. Could history be repeating itself? America has made this mistake before. If this story feels familiar, It's because America has already lived through something very similar. More than 50 years ago, another small Japanese car arrived in the United States. It looked underpowered, too small, too simple. Many people dismissed it almost immediately. That car was the Honda Civic. Few believed it could ever compete with Detroit's powerful V8 sedans and station wagons. But history had other plans. In the early 1970s, Detroit dominated the American auto industry. Bigger engines meant better cars. Fuel was cheap. Horsepower sold vehicles. Then everything changed. The oil crisis suddenly made fuel efficiency one of the most important factors for buyers. Almost overnight, millions of Americans started looking for smaller, more economical cars. Honda was ready. Toyota was ready. Datsun was ready. Detroit wasn't. The companies that had spent years optimizing for efficiency suddenly found themselves serving exactly what the market needed. Not because they predicted the crisis, but because they had been solving a different problem all along. The Honda Civic didn't win because it was the fastest car. It didn't win because it was the cheapest. It won because the world changed. And when the market changed, Honda's philosophy suddenly made perfect sense. That's the pattern worth remembering. Industries rarely change because of one revolutionary product. They change when an old assumption quietly stops being true. Perhaps the real lesson isn't about Honda, it's about how quickly consumer priorities can shift. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it often follows familiar patterns. Detroit once underestimated small Japanese cars because they didn't fit the American market. Then the market changed. Today, another tiny Japanese vehicle is raising similar questions, not because it's replacing pickup trucks, but because it represents a completely different way of thinking about mobility. So the real question isn't whether the MiBot will become America's next Honda Civic. The real question is Japan the only country moving in this direction? This isn't just happening in Japan, it's becoming a global movement. If the MiBot were the only example, this story would end here. It would simply be an interesting Japanese experiment, but it isn't. Across Europe and Asia, dozens of companies are reaching the same conclusion from completely different directions. Smaller vehicles are beginning to solve problems that larger vehicles simply can't. In China, compact electric cars like the BYD Seagull, Wuling Hongguang Mini EV, and Geely Panda Mini have attracted enormous attention by making electric transportation dramatically more affordable. In Europe, vehicles such as the Citroën Ami, Microlino, and Fiat Topolino are redefining what urban transportation can look like. Despite being built by different companies for different markets, they all share remarkably similar ideas. Smaller batteries, lower ownership costs, simple designs, short-distance mobility, maximum efficiency instead of maximum capability. Without working together, manufacturers around the world are beginning to answer the same question in almost the same way. That's when the MiBot becomes much more than one unusual Japanese startup. It becomes evidence of something much larger, a global shift in thinking. Instead of asking, how can we build a better SUV? More companies are beginning to ask, do people really need an SUV for every trip? That's an entirely different conversation, and it changes the way we think about the future of transportation. The biggest threat to an industry rarely comes from one company. It comes from an idea. Ideas spread. Companies copy them. Markets adapt. Consumer expectations evolve. That's exactly how every major transformation begins. The automobile replaced the horse. Japanese economy cars challenged American muscle. Electric vehicles disrupted internal combustion. Now another question is quietly emerging. What if the next revolution isn't about building better cars, but about building only the car people actually need? And if that's true, what happens to an industry built on selling something much bigger? The real threat was never the $600 car. By now, it's tempting to think this story is about one tiny electric car, or about Japan, or even about affordable transportation. But none of those are the real story. The MiBot is only the first clue. The real discovery is much bigger. Every major shift in the auto industry begins with a simple question that most people ignore. And today, that question is surprisingly uncomfortable. What if we've been designing cars for yesterday's world instead of tomorrow's? For more than a century, the auto industry has measured success in familiar ways. More horsepower, longer driving range, larger vehicles, more luxury, higher prices. But people's lives have quietly changed. Millions of daily trips involve just one person. Many commutes are only a few miles long. Urban parking is becoming more expensive. Younger generations are spending differently. Owning a vehicle is no longer the only definition of freedom. In many situations, bigger no longer means better. It simply means more expensive. The MiBot doesn't solve every transportation problem, but it does solve one extremely well, and sometimes that's exactly how disruption begins. History teaches the same lesson again and again. The products that reshape industries usually look insignificant at first. The Volkswagen Beetle looked too small for America. The Honda Civic looked too weak. The Toyota Prius looked too slow. Tesla's first Roadster looked like an expensive experiment. Each of them was criticized for what it lacked. Almost nobody noticed the new idea hiding underneath. The MiBot may never become a global bestseller. It may never even reach American roads in large numbers. But that's not the point. The important question isn't whether this particular car succeeds. It's whether the thinking behind it spreads, because once an idea proves useful, someone else will improve it, someone else will scale it, and eventually, someone else will make it impossible to ignore. Perhaps the biggest lesson isn't about Japan, and it isn't about a $600 car. It's about the danger of assuming the future will always look like the past. Detroit didn't become successful by building the smallest cars. It became successful by understanding what Americans wanted. The question now is whether those wants are beginning to change. If the next generation values efficiency over excess, simplicity over complexity, and practicality over prestige, then the companies that understand those priorities first may define the next chapter of the auto industry. Maybe the MiBot will disappear. Maybe it will remain a niche product. Or maybe, years from now, people will look back at this tiny one-seat car the same way they now look at the first Honda Civic or the first Prius. Not as the vehicle that changed everything, but as the vehicle that revealed the direction everything else was about to go. Because in the end, the biggest threat to America's auto industry was never a $600 car. It was the possibility that the definition of the perfect car had quietly started to change.